How often the police do not hurry to investigate the disappearance of a teenager, assuming that the girl or boy ran away on their own, and parents, with tears in their eyes, are forced to assure the officers that their child would never do such a thing. But what if this is precisely the case when the teenager did indeed run away from home, not just once, but multiple times? Does the child deserve something terrible to happen to them just because they decided to rebel? Should they not be searched for just because they supposedly brought it upon themselves? Tanya Kash was born on October 14, 1981, in the family of Jerry and Sherry Kash. The family lived in Monongahela, Pennsylvania, a town with a population of fewer than 10,000 people. The first 7 years of Tanya's life were very happy. Her parents fulfilled all the whims of their beloved daughter, traveled a lot, and spent time together. But when Tanya turned 7, it became noticeable that her mother had mental health problems. It started innocently enough. She could laugh without reason and behaved somewhat irrationally. But when she began setting fires, leaving her young daughter alone at home, and engaging in affairs on the side, Jerry couldn't help but pay attention to it. After Sherry attacked her daughter with a knife, Tanya was 11 years old when her father decided to divorce his wife. Despite the man's decision being for the safety of his daughter, it greatly affected her. It was very difficult for the girl to understand what was really happening. Sherry was temporarily placed in a mental health facility, but upon her release, she attempted to forcefully enter the family home, where she was prohibited from returning, and she harassed the family. Therefore, Tanya's father didn't want to risk it and hurriedly took his daughter further away from Sherry. He had just met a woman named Joanna. Joanna lived in the town of McKeesport, Pennsylvania, with her 7-year-old son. She told Jerry that she would be glad if he and his daughter moved in with her. Jerry saw these relations as a fresh start in life for him and his daughter. However, Tanya wasn't happy about the move, and there were many reasons for that. Firstly, McKeesport ranks as the 4th most dangerous city in the USA, making it unsafe for a young girl to wander around the town. At home, it wasn't any better for her. She felt as though Jerry, Joanna, and her son would be better off without her, as if nobody wanted anything to do with her. Finding solace at school was also impossible. Other girls bullied her, assuming that a blonde with big blue eyes could easily steal their boyfriends. Soon, she got into a fight at school and was suspended. After that, school became even more unbearable for her. Tanya started skipping classes and running away from home. While running away, she wandered around the town, heading to her grandmother's, aunt's, or mother's place, with whom she occasionally met despite everything. Jerry repeatedly sought help from the police, but every time his daughter returned home on her own. Therefore, by her 3rd runaway, the situation began to resemble the story of the boy who cried wolf. Despite being in one of America's most dangerous cities, the police had more to deal with than just looking for a troubled teenager who ran away after yet another argument with her family. Therefore, when Jerry and Joanna woke up on February 10, 1996, and didn't find their daughter at home, they assumed she would return in a day or two as usual. Still, Joanna got into the car and began driving around the town, trying to locate Tanya, but she was nowhere to be found. However, after 4 days, their concern grew, and Jerry reported her disappearance to the police. Jerry thought his daughter might have run away to her mother, who was covering for her. But as expected, the police didn't immediately take action, and Jerry and Joanna had to search for their daughter on their own. A few days after the girl disappeared, Tanya's grandmother found a possible lead. The last time the girl was at her place, she left a piece of paper with a phone number on it. The grandmother called the number, and a woman named Judy Sokol answered. The girl's connection to an unknown adult woman who worked as a hairdresser and had no affiliation with the school seemed strange to Jerry, and he passed this information to the police. Judy Sokol told the officers that her home had been a refuge for teenagers and children who had run away from home. She provided them with shelter, food, and clothing, after which they either returned home or went elsewhere. The last time Judy saw Tanya was in December 1995. The girl ran away again and asked Judy for a jacket. After that, Judy didn't see Tanya again. Since the girl had returned home after that previous incident, the police bid farewell to the woman and left. After a week since Tanya's disappearance, Jerry and Joanna searched through their daughter's room to find any clue as to where she might have gone. In her dresser, they found a note of inappropriate content written by a man. It contained an offer to Tanya to provide an intimate service. The spouses immediately realized who had written it: their neighbor, Kevin Churchfield. Not long before Tanya's disappearance, she told her stepmother that she and Kevin had gone out for a snack. Joanna asked if they were with a larger group, but no, they were just the two of them. Of course, Joanna found it strange that the older man showed interest in the teenage girl. However, Tanya brushed off her warnings and said they had simply discussed the time when she would babysit Kevin's child. And now it turns out that Kevin did indeed make inappropriate advances towards Tanya. Jerry and Joanna went to the police, but he himself did not expect what he would hear from the investigators. It appears that several months before Tanya's disappearance, she went to the station alone and filed a complaint against Kevin for his inappropriate behavior towards her. The girl had to sit alone with the officers and tell them that every time she went to Kevin's to babysit his child, he would suggest intimate things and even force inappropriate physical contact. Jerry and Joanna were shocked by what they heard because they had no idea about Tanya's visit to the police. But another shocking twist awaited the couple in Kevin's case. Kevin Churchfield was arrested, however. The court hearing was scheduled exactly when the girl went missing, and since, according to the law, Tanya needed to appear in court to proceed with the case, but she didn't show up, the charges were dropped. It was hard to believe that these events were not connected. Kevin underwent a polygraph test. Although he had previously denied inappropriate behavior towards Tanya, he admitted to it, but vehemently denied any involvement in her disappearance. The polygraph examiner even asked if he killed Tanya, but he stood firm in his denial. The police obtained a search warrant for his home, but they found nothing. Essentially, there was no evidence that he abducted or killed Tanya, and it was impossible to charge him with inappropriate behavior due to the absence of the girl. Therefore, the man had to be released. Weeks turned into months. Joanna decided to go back to her stepdaughter's room and sift through her belongings, thinking they might have missed something. And indeed, between Tanya's mattress, she found a diary. Overall, it was no different from any other teenage girl's diary. There were thoughts about life, boys, parents, but something stood out. The name Tom appeared repeatedly in the diary. Neither the father nor the stepmother had any idea who this Tom was. However, it seemed from the diary that Judy Sokol knew Tom, with whom the police had already spoken. Investigators pondered whether Judy might know more than she wanted to show and returned to her house. That's when Judy told them she had heard that Tanya liked a guard at her school. His name was Tom Hose, and Tanya even confessed her feelings to him in a note. The police decided to go straight to Thomas's house. The 38-year-old man lived with his parents and son and worked as the head of security at the school. Thomas was surprised that they hadn't found the girl yet. He thought she would have been home long ago. He explained that he informed the school management to avoid trouble and was worried that someone might think something inappropriate was happening. He generally regarded the schoolgirl's infatuation as something innocent and not deserving of special attention. Towards the end of the conversation, officers asked if they could enter the house quickly and inspect it. But Thomas replied that his parents were asleep and would be frightened to see the police, so he suggested they come another time. The police left, and after checking at the school that the guard had indeed reported the girl's note, they concluded he was telling the truth and crossed him off the list of people who might know something about Tanya's disappearance. Interestingly, when Tanya's mother Sherry was informed about her daughter's disappearance, she thought to check the phone bills. She found the number that her daughter had last called when she was at home. Sherry dialed it, and a man named Thomas Hose answered. She asked him if he knew where her daughter was, to which he replied that he had no idea what she was talking about. Despite this, Sherry still reported it to the police, but they dismissed it because after speaking with Thomas, they were convinced he had no involvement in the disappearance. For 2 whole years, the investigation remained at a standstill. Jerry saw the case being forgotten right before his eyes, and he couldn't change that. However, in July 1998, the body of a teenage girl was found at the cemetery in McKeesport. Many were convinced it was Tanya, but she was identified as 14-year-old Kimberly Krim. She had been assaulted, but it was impossible to determine the cause of death. The police began investigating her murder and discovered that another girl had been killed in McKeesport 3 years earlier, Anna Marie Callahan. Anna Marie's body, a 16-year-old, was found in the river with a wire around her neck and tape on her wrists. Anna Marie, Kimberly, and Tanya were all teenage girls of similar ages, described as attractive but troubled. They all attended the same school. This led investigators to speculate that Tanya might also have been killed and her body hadn't been found yet. They also feared a serial killer might be on the loose. As horrifying as it sounded, the discovery of Kimberly's body became the catalyst that prompted the police to reopen the investigation into Tanya's disappearance nearly 2 years later. They reached out to the Missing and Exploited Children's Center, and Tanya's photo appeared on 400 million milk cartons. But there were no leads. The cases of all 3 girls remained unsolved, and it continued like this for years. A whole 10 years passed since Tanya's disappearance. Suddenly, there was an unexpected breakthrough in the case. On March 21, 2006, a man called the police. He reported that Tanya Kash was in the house of Thomas Hose, the school security guard. The police were unsure whether to understand or believe the caller because they had removed Thomas from the list of suspects many years ago. Nevertheless, they dispersed to their cars and headed to the man's house. After knocking on the door, they heard Thomas exclaim, "Oh darn, it's the police." However, the door had already been opened. The officers identified the girl, but clarified if she was called Tanya Kash, and she replied, "Yes." Then, the girl turned to Thomas and said, "It's all over." Has Tanya been living peacefully with Thomas all this time and simply didn't think to let her parents know that everything was fine? No, everything was completely different. Tanya met Thomas at school, where the 14-year-old girl attended classes, and the 38-year-old man worked as a security guard. He approached her in the school corridor, noticing that she was new there. Other girls considered the guard to be mean and unfriendly, but he was quite friendly towards her. Thomas took an interest in her difficult home life, and when she was surprised and asked how he knew about it, he replied that it was part of his job. Indeed, he persuaded the school psychologist to show him the girl's confidential documents. Thomas took advantage of a time when Tanya was at her most vulnerable. Her life became difficult in the new city, at the new school, after her parents' divorce, and she was desperately striving to fit into her new environment. It seemed to her that Thomas was the person who genuinely cared about her. He gave her the attention she lacked at home. He was cheerful, constantly joking, and treated her kindly. Once he found her skipping class. She was scared he would report it, but he said he wouldn't. And it was the first time he leaned in and kissed her in the school corridor. The real horror of this story is that everyone in the school knew about the inappropriate relationship between the security guard and the student. The director either didn't want to or didn't know how to solve this problem, even though Thomas himself reported the girl's note with romantic content to her. The director attempted to transfer the girl's class to another section of the school, but it didn't change anything. The psychologist discussed the violence she experienced at home. However, the police lieutenant, responsible for maintaining order in the school and dealing with problematic children, behaved the worst. The security guard informed him that she was a troubled teenager, often lied and made false accusations. Additionally, she was involved with older men. However, the lieutenant didn't even attempt to take any action regarding this matter. Meanwhile, having gained the trust of the school and even the police officer, Thomas began to act more actively. On another occasion, when the girl complained that she was unhappy with her father and stepmother, and there was no place for her at her mother's home, Thomas suggested that she escape and live with him. The man promised her that they would have a wonderful life together, and he would take care of her much better than her parents. Considering that the girl was only 14 years old and heard these words from an adult who was the only one to show interest in her, she believed him. In January 1996, Thomas began to develop a plan for Tanya's escape. Early in the morning on February 10th, she was supposed to run away from home and go to Judy Sokol. Thomas believed that staying with Judy was a great idea because nobody would suspect Tanya being with her, and she would be the last person associated with her disappearance. As soon as Tanya appeared at Judy's house, she cut and dyed the girl's hair. For a whole month, everything was excellent. Tanya lived at Judy's and Thomas visited them. Thomas and Judy were kind and caring towards her, and it seemed to her that it would always be so. But she still didn't fully understand what was happening. A month later, Thomas drugged Tanya so that she barely understood what was happening. It was the first time he violated her, taking away her virginity. Around the same time, Judy told Thomas that Tanya couldn't stay with her any longer, and it was time for her to leave. Therefore, seizing the moment when his parents weren't home, Thomas took the girl to his own home. Thomas led Tanya to his bedroom on the second floor, and it was precisely there, in the tiny room, that she lived all those years. For the first few years, she was not allowed to leave the bedroom at all, so that the man's parents wouldn't find out that someone else was living in the house, even to use the restroom. Tom placed a bucket for the girl to use for that purpose. She used the same bucket to brush her teeth late at night and early in the morning. Tom fed his captive sandwiches with peanut butter and jam along with bananas. At best, twice a week she was allowed to take a shower in the basement after Thomas's parents went to bed. She wore either Thomas's or his son's clothing. Tanya learned every creaky floorboard in the house to avoid stepping on them when Thomas's parents were home. She kept her room locked from the inside, and when Thomas coughed as he ascended the stairs, it was a signal for Tanya to open the door. Tanya admits that she felt like a dog, waiting for the owner to return home. Certainly, the violence against her was constant, before the man went to work, after, and before bedtime. However, the door locked from the inside. Why didn't she escape? Thomas adeptly manipulated her mind. This tactic wouldn't work with a girl from a loving family, but Tanya believed she wasn't wanted at home, and Thomas played on those strings, constantly reminding her that her parents weren't looking for her, that nobody needed her, and it was better for her to stay with him. The poor girl couldn't know that in the first few months after Jerry's daughter disappeared, Jerry spent countless hours driving around McKeesport, trying to find Tanya, passing by Thomas's house many times as they only lived 2 miles apart. When Jerry wondered where his daughter could be after these 10 years, the last thing he could assume was that she was just 10 minutes further down the road. 2 years later, Tanya decided she had had enough. Her health started deteriorating, and she decided to leave Thomas. It seemed like he wasn't holding her, but it wasn't that simple. Threats poured in from her tormentor. He insisted he would kill her, strangle her in her sleep, take her out of the house, and throw her body into the river. He also threatened to harm her family. He started telling her about 2 other girls who were killed, hinting that he killed them. Incredibly, but soon Thomas allowed Tanya not only to leave her room, but also to go out of the house. The first time Thomas permitted Tanya to leave the house, he allowed her to go to the store. A man handed her $120 and a list of things she needed to buy. The girl confesses that she was terrified when she had to go to the store because Thomas pressured her, explaining how she should behave, look down, not talk to anyone. And when she returned, the man was waiting for her to quietly escort her back to the bedroom. Over time, Thomas gave his victim more and more freedom. But when she left the house, she had to introduce herself with a different name that he gave her, Nikki Diane Allen. In doing so, she continued to live in the same town where she lived before her disappearance. Her father's house was only 15 minutes away from Thomas. However, since so many years had passed and she had changed physically, becoming older, people were not actively looking for her, not trying to see the same face they once saw on all the milk cartons they bought. In 2005, Thomas's father's health began to deteriorate, and Thomas informed the family that he was dating a girl named Nikki, who would move in with them and help take care of the house and the sick. For the next 10 months, she was allowed to roam around the house. She also went to church, met people. Tanya often visited a store located down the street. As a regular customer, she got acquainted with the owner, Joe Sparico, his wife and daughter. In them, she saw the perfect family she had always dreamed of and tried to spend as much time with them as possible. At some point, Joe offered Tanya, whom he knew as Nikki, a job. Nikki told Joe about herself, living with a 45-year-old man. Joe found this strange. It wasn't the 22-year age difference that bothered him, but rather how she spoke about her boyfriend. Joe sensed something was off and tried to cautiously inquire about Tanya's life, but she dismissed his concerns, reassuring him that everything was fine. However, as she analyzed her life and the normal, loving family life of Joe, his wife and daughter, Tanya realized how unhappy she was. This culminated on March 20th, 2006, when they were alone in the store chatting. Suddenly, Tanya burst into tears. Joe, of course, asked, "Nikki, what happened?" That's when she looked at him and said, "My name is not Nikki Allen, it's Tanya Kash." She told Joe everything that had happened to her over the past 10 years, the constant abuse and being kept in a small room for a long time. Joe promised to help her. He told her to go home after work and behave as usual so as not to alert Thomas. That evening, he called the police and reported that Tanya Kash was being held at her home by Thomas Hose. When Tanya confirmed to the officer that she was indeed Tanya, they immediately took her out of the house and brought her to the police station. Thomas was arrested, and Jerry was informed that his daughter had been found alive. At first, he didn't believe his ears and thought it was a prank, but it wasn't a joke. When he rushed to the police station, Tanya was indeed there. The reunion with his daughter he describes as one of the wildest, insane, but joyful moments in life. Because although Jerry never lost hope, He understood that the chance of finding his daughter alive after 10 years was almost zero. The father took his daughter home, and the next day she returned to the police station to give her statements. Meanwhile, the police searched Thomas's house and found a diary in which he recorded details of all instances of violence against his victim, including all the gruesome details. He even had colored notes for various intimate preferences. He kept the diary not just for himself, but to boast in front of friends and colleagues. The police also found that he lied about his work experience when hired, and the school didn't even conduct all the necessary checks, allowing him access to children he was supposed to protect, but was, in reality, preying on. 3 years after Tanya's disappearance, students praised him for his merits and gave him a commemorative plaque, stating what a wonderful guardian he was. If only they knew. The man faced a series of charges related to violence and endangering the girl's life. However, he was not accused of kidnapping because Tanya came to him willingly. In 2007, Thomas pleaded guilty to the charges of violence. During the trial, Thomas claimed that only God knew how ashamed he was, but Tanya was lucky, and she should thank him because without him, she would already be dead. In response, the judge remarked that he had too high an opinion of himself. The man was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Judy Sokol, 58 years old, was sentenced to imprisonment for a term ranging from 6 to 23 months. Thomas was not charged with child abduction, a crime that is punished very severely in the USA. He also wasn't accused in connection with the cases of Kimberly Krim and Anna Marie, although while awaiting trial, an informant from the prison claimed that Thomas had confessed to killing Kimberly. Interestingly, Tanya vividly remembers the day when her body was found. On that day, Thomas entered the bedroom, announcing that Kimberly had been found dead. Tanya was upset. She knew Kimberly from school, and Thomas's reaction, cold and distant, puzzled her. He stood there with crossed arms and simply said something like, "You knew it was all leading to this." There is another chilling detail that might be just a coincidence, but it's also possible that it's not. The graveyard where Kimberly's body was found is visible directly from Thomas's bedroom. However, to this day, he has not been officially linked to these girls, and Tanya is devastated that she cannot say for certain whether he is guilty of their murders or not, because she still doesn't fully know what he is capable of. Unfortunately, after Tanya was rescued, she faced a barrage of criticism from people who couldn't understand why she didn't just leave. Among the accusers were Jerry and Joanna. Although her father acknowledged that Thomas could have had psychological influence on Tanya, he couldn't understand why she couldn't just walk away. After all, Thomas's bedroom was often left unlocked from the inside, and she was frequently left alone at home. Moreover, she escaped on her own. She wasn't taken from the bedroom, and there was no weapon to her head during the abduction. Therefore, Jerry and Joanna essentially claimed that she chose this fate herself. The father also wanted to hear Tom's side of the story because, in his words, there are 3 sides to the story: Tanya's, Tom's, and the truth. Unlike Tanya's father, the police considered this a classic case of Stockholm Syndrome, a bond that develops between a victim and their kidnapper. Victims genuinely believe they depend on the kidnapper, that they are needed. Tanya herself admitted that she was drawn to her tormentor like a magnet. Each time she left, she felt compelled to return to him. Moreover, if everything were as one-sided as Jerry envisioned, his daughter wouldn't have had a multitude of health problems due to what the assailant did to her. She underwent a hysterectomy, a surgery to remove the uterus. For a year, she was connected to a colostomy bag, and she suffers from arthritis because she couldn't develop normally as a young girl confined to a tiny room. Not to mention the constant nightmares, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and anorexia that developed over these 10 years. Therefore, the violence inflicted on her by Thomas will continue to haunt her for the rest of her life. It is highly unlikely that she would have chosen such a life if she had known what awaited her. Tanya filed a lawsuit against the city and the school district because neither the police nor the school took any action regarding the relationship that developed between the security guard and the student. She also filed lawsuits against Thomas and his parents, but they were unsuccessful because too much time had passed. However, when her autobiography was published, lawsuits were filed against her, including by Jerry, Joanna, and her psychologist, who did not like how they were portrayed in the book. But thanks to the book, it became clear that she was let down not only by her parents, school, and the police, but also by the Child Protection Organization. On January 5, 1996, a month before her escape, Tanya had a physical altercation with her stepmother, and Joanna threw an ashtray at her. Family neighbors called Child Protective Services, who spoke with the girl's parents, the school psychologist, and the police lieutenant assigned to the school. This lieutenant told the Child Protection Service that Tanya was a problematic child, always lying and accusing others of everything. The lieutenant went to the girl's home and threatened to place her in a facility for troubled children if she continued. Child Protective Services suspended their intervention in Tanya's case. Is it surprising, given all this, that after everything she went through, she believed that the only person who cared about her was a monster manipulating her? Thomas was unable to be released early, but in February 2022, after serving 15 years, he was released and moved back to the same house where he had kept Tanya. Tanya lives 15 minutes away from his house, and she still fears running into him, for example, on the street or in a store. It was challenging for Tanya to rebuild her life after such trauma. She was convinced that the old Tanya had died, and it was crucial for her to understand how to live on. She suffered from nightmares, and everything was a struggle. However, she survived, obtained an education, studied business at university, and got married. Due to everything Thomas subjected her to, she cannot have her own biological children, but she is raising her husband's son and daughter. She wants people to know that even after such a severe trauma, there is hope. Teenagers who run away after being preyed upon by adults are still victims, and they should not be blamed for what happened to them.